hey, I don't know. Okay,
I may send you out and let you pass them out in a second.
Okay. By the way, I don't know if Seth told you this, but we're doing Kahoot next week since we already have like the video and stuff.
That's no problem. Hello, family. Hey, guys. Hey, we're gonna do a song tonight that's a little bit different, but it's actually gonna tie into our lesson. So everybody stand up. It's been a little while, but this is how the song goes. Everybody, put your sheep ears on. It's a good one. Here we go. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I praise the Lord, my soul to keep. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I don't want to be a goat, no. I don't want to be a goat, no. 'Cause goats got no hope. I don't want to be a goat, no. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I praise the Lord, my soul to keep. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't want to be a hypocrite, 'cause they're not hip with it. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I don't want to be a Pharisee. I don't want to be a Pharisee, 'cause they're not Pharisee. I don't want to be a Pharisee. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I don't want to be a Sadducee. I don't want to be a Sadducee, 'cause they're just Sadducee. I don't want to be a Sadducee. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. I just want to be a sheep, ba 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 ba. Y'all got to sing. Good job. And again, I will say to you, hello, family. Hello. All right, a couple of things right off the bat. First of all, if you did not get the note sheets for tonight's class, raise your hand, and Ashlyn Fuller will bring those around to you. All right. Raise your hand. Keep your hand raised. Ashlyn will bring a note sheet to you as well. All right. If you did not get candy, if you did not get Smarties, raise your hand and Marcus will bring you some candy. Maybe we should raise hands one at a time. Yeah, never mind. We'll get the candy later. First, let's get the note sheets. Some of you are trying to get more than one piece of candy. I saw some of you out there. All right, so I've said hello to my family, but let's also say hello to Rachel Tucker and Cam Mann, who are here tonight. Cam, stand up, Cam. Rachel, where's Rachel? Rachel, stand up. We're glad you're here with us tonight. They are here tonight interviewing. They are potential interns for the summer. Of course, you guys will remember Rachel, who was here this past summer, and Cam is a student at Freed-Hardeman. Sitting next to Cam is Tyler Thomas, who came back with us tonight. Sitting next to Tyler is Evan Edwards, who's here with us tonight. Good to see you again, man. Glad you're back. Good to see y'all both. All right, we have a few announcements to run over, so let's do that. We got all kinds of exciting things happening tonight. Dig Devo. There's a picture of guys in the dark at Dig Devo. Seth Miller. Seth, give us a little report on Dig and what's to come.
Yeah, we had fun at
6 to 5. It's going to be a long night. Yeah. 23 hours of dig. Yeah. Very good. Dig deep. It's going to be a long one. All right. And then I think the girls, this is exciting with girls having things taped to their heads. Girls had their very first Impact Devo. Ashlyn Fuller, give us a little report there, if you would.
Yeah, so we had a great first turnout. I would love to see more faces next week. We're going to be hearing from Anna Davidson, and it will be 6 to 7:30 here at the chapel.
Very good. They're studying this year. They're studying God is, and each week's a different word that God is. This past it was God is my strength. So anyway, it's going to be an awesome study, and I appreciate our interns working hard on that. All right, let's go to the next one. Lake Day is coming, so high schoolers, put this on your calendar if it's not already. We've got a good number signed up, but we still got a lot of room, and it's going to be an awesome, awesome day at Deer Run. So looking forward to that. On the next slide, you'll see an announcement for Altitude Night, which is happening, the 24th. So middle school, 6 to 6, yeah. Is Seth Miller doing all of our announcements tonight? Is that what's happening? No. We appreciate our interns who do a great job. Sorry. No, Altitude Night's coming up, so middle schoolers, mark your calendars. That's going to be a thing where basically you get dropped off at Altitude, get picked up at Altitude. It'll be awesome, so be there if you can. All right, next. Is it time for a video? Aha! Tonight, we are revealing the middle school retreat theme. Middle school retreat's happening next month. Check this out. All right, so Magi boxes. I think we're good. Okay, so for this week, I think everybody knows what to do. I have one last thing though. I have some stuff that nobody needs to touch or mess with. It's in room 105, so just leave that alone for the next few days. Aside from that, I think we're good.
I'm going to get in that room.
Of course I knew that they go to room 105. That's why I got Christian to guard it.
Okay, so we have to get into that room.
We got a couple of ideas.
What's in the room?
Christian! Phyllis ran over Abby with the car.
Phyllis would be my dog.
Abby ran over Phyllis with the car.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Christian! It's me, Simon Sharp! What's in the room, Christian? Christian!
Guys, what do we do?
I think I got it.
Christian, we have cookies!
There's no cookies.
Figured there wasn't actually cookies, but on the off chance there was a cookie, worth it.
I don't think it is.
Honestly, I think it's Among Us.
Really? No.
It's gotta be Charlotte's Web.
Charlotte's Web,
The Sound of Bible?
The Sound of Bible.
Just keep swimming.
Job, a man, a suffering man.
I have been waiting for 30 minutes. When I took this job, there's certain things that weren't in the job description.
Loki! I can't believe it's you, Loki! Christian said we wouldn't get in the room, but I knew we could distract him with cookies!
So that should be a lot of fun. So middle schoolers, your theme coming up very soon, timekeepers. So it's going to be an awesome retreat. Looking forward to that. All right, so as we begin tonight, as we continue our series called Candyland. Last week, Christian kicked it off, and everybody got 3 musketeers. Do you remember what we talked about last week? 3 famous people in the Bible, kind of a trio, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Tonight, as we continue our series, we're going to talk about Smarties. And so we'll talk more about that, what that means in just a minute. But before we do, I wanted to put a quote up here on the screen. If you remember this quote, the quote goes like this: you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Do you remember this line from the movie The Dark Knight? Harvey Dent, who becomes, do you remember? some of you, Two-Face. So it's interesting to think about who it is that says this quote, because Harvey Dent goes on to become Two-Face. And that's interesting that later on he does become the villain. So that's kind of an interesting quote, but what does that quote mean? What do you think it means? Can anyone sort of make that quote sound profound? Is it profound? We were going to play a game tonight called Profound or Stupid. I think we might do it next week. You think this one sounds stupid? It's interesting. Here's the idea behind the quote. It's interesting to think about how usually there's a very thin line between a hero and a villain. And a hero is only a couple of bad mistakes away from becoming the bad guy. If you think about that like in Marvel or some of the DC comics or things like that, it kind of makes sense. How one bad thing can happen and suddenly the hero becomes the villain. So I wanted to kind of start there tonight as we think about the people I wanted to introduce to you tonight. I think it's a really great way for us to think about the characters I want to introduce you to. Tonight we're going to talk about the Pharisees. The Pharisees were they end up becoming pretty despicable characters. Who were the Pharisees? Well, I thought this would be a great way for us to introduce a segment or to reintroduce you to a segment that I did a long time ago, and it's called 2 Minutes with Tim Martin. So Tim Martin is going to explain who the Pharisees were. Check this out. We'll talk some more.
Certainly you know from reading the New Testament they were the most frequent opponents of Jesus. They were a religious sect within Judaism in the time that Jesus was alive and for a long time before that and a long time after that. They eventually became what we call Rabbinic Judaism after the temple was destroyed in AD 70. Their name, we think, comes from a Hebrew word parash, which means to separate or distinguish, and they did think that they themselves are very separate and distinguished. They're a very popular party with the people. We think that's maybe why they were jealous of Jesus, because he was becoming very popular with the people. They were a people very well trained in what we call the law or the Torah. They were scribes and scholars of the law and very well versed in it. Paul was a Pharisee, and we know he was well versed in what we call the Old Testament. And they were experts in it. They frequently quizzed Jesus about that. They also believed in something else, like the Sadducees didn't believe in, the oral tradition, the oral law that had not been handed down by Moses in writing, but had been given to Moses and handed down verbally throughout the generations of Israel. They were focused on the external deeds that you did, Sabbath observance, who you ate with, other laws and things. They wanted people to see what they were doing. And that's one of the reasons they rebuked Jesus often, because he wasn't doing those external things that they thought were so important. And we remember there are some friendly Pharisees like Nicodemus. Gamaliel was pretty neutral about the apostles spreading the gospel in the book of Acts. And like I said before, Paul was a Pharisee, but he said he was zealous for God's law when he was persecuting the church. So there were some good Pharisees, and Nicodemus even mentions others who were like him. So that's a little brief overview of the Pharisees in the first century that Jesus dealt with, and hope that helps you maybe understand that when you read the New Testament.
All right, so the Pharisees were these guys who really should have been heroes. In a lot of people's minds, they were heroes, but it didn't take long when we start hearing Jesus talk about them to find out who they really, truly were, and they end up being some of the villains, some of the most despicable in all of God's Word. The Pharisees wanted people to keep the law. So I want you to think about this. You know how sometimes there's movies that make you feel sorry for the villain? This kind of sounds like a series we did recently where we studied the villains of the Bible. Well, there's things about these guys that you almost your heart breaks for them a little bit. So these were people who really wanted people to do God's will. They really, really cared deeply about the law. And they wanted other people to care deeply about doing what God says. And so, but in doing so and wanting people to keep the law, they take a commandment of God and they'd add extra things to it. Okay? Let me give you an example of something that I ran across this week. So, for instance, they took God's command in the Old Testament of remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And so remember, on the seventh day, people weren't supposed to work. So that's what the Bible says. So God says, don't work on the Sabbath day under the Old Covenant. Don't work on the Sabbath day. But God didn't really define what that meant when he says, don't work on the Sabbath. That's kind of broad. So these guys took it upon themselves to go, let's define what work is. And so, again, in an effort to get people to do what God says, they decided, let's really define work. And so they added things upon the commandments of God. So for instance, they believed you were breaking the Sabbath if you walked by and looked into a mirror. They believed that was work on the Sabbath, and it was not acceptable to do that. They considered it breaking the Sabbath if you lit a candle. That's doing work. So if you do that, you're sinning. This is stuff that they would believe, and they would teach, and they would hold up as the commandments of God. However, remember how Jesus was really frustrated with them about their hypocrisy? So they would teach something like that, but then they would say, it's not work on the Sabbath if you hire a Gentile to light the candle for you. All right? So they were an interesting group of people. So here are these religious people trying to get people to follow God's law, but in the process, they're inventing their own laws and binding them on people. So it'd almost be like if God said, thou shalt not walk through that door. All right? Remember, they cared very much about what God said. So here's an example of something they might do. If God said, thou shalt not walk through that door, they made additional rules. Let's make a hedge around the door. So it's almost like they would say, if it's a sin to walk through that door, it should also be a sin to not even take a step towards that door. Do you see how messed up that can become and how kind of a slippery slope that can be? And so that's what we're going to study tonight. Where did these Smarties, where did these experts on the law go wrong? These religious heroes, how did they become the villains? What were the fallacies of the Pharisees? That's what we're going to study tonight. So open your Bibles, if you would, to Matthew chapter 23. The word Pharisee appears in God's Word about 97 times. We don't have time to look at 97 different passages, but in Matthew 23, it gives us a pretty good, I would say snapshot, but a really good insight into some of Jesus' frustrations with these guys. Again, there's other places we could look, and there are more things about them that are frustrating than just what we're going to read in Matthew 23, but this will give us a little bit of a glimpse into the kind of people that they were. So here we go. Jesus is going to speak very candidly, very openly, very honestly about what their fallacies were. Here we go. Matthew 23, starting in verse 1. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach, but they do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. All right, so what's the first fallacy that we see right here? They preach, but they don't practice it, right? They don't practice what they preach. Jesus said they sit in the seat of Moses. They're teachers of the law, and we should listen to the law. But Jesus said, don't follow them, right? Jesus calls them, a word that he uses a lot is the word hypocrite. You know what a hypocrite is? Someone who says one thing, says you should do it, or you shouldn't do something, and then they go and do it. That's a hypocrite. The word hypocrite, this is kind of interesting. It comes from the idea of an actor on the stage, this ancient word, hypocrite. It comes from the idea of people who would be on the stage and they would wear a mask. All right, and so they go on the stage, they put the mask on, and then when the play was over, the mask would come off, and they'd step off the stage. Can you see how this idea of wearing a mask is a little bit like hypocrisy? You act a certain way. I'm at church, I got my mask on, and then I go back to school, and the mask comes off, and I act however I want to act, right? So that's the idea of hypocrisy. They didn't practice what they preached. Let's go to the next one. We're going to try to move quickly tonight because there's a lot here in Matthew 23. Verse 5, they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the places of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. All right, so fallacy number 2 or flaw number 2, the next thing that we see them doing is they did all of their deeds to be seen by others. That was who they were. If people were watching, they were good. They loved an audience. They wanted other people to see them. That word phylacteries is kind of weird, right? But a phylactery, on the screen you can see, a phylactery was a box that they would, like Jewish men would bind to the front of their heads. And inside of this box were scriptures, and this box was to remind these people to pray. And so that's kind of cool, I guess, a reminder to pray. But what was the problem Jesus had with that? He said they make their phylacteries really large. So it's almost like, oh, wow, look how holy he is. Wow, he really cares about prayer. And so it was really just this sign of, oh, look how great I am. And that's what Jesus had a problem with, right? This idea of the only reason they have that is just so other people look at them and believe that they're holy. So That's what a phylactery was. They had all these things just to grab people's attention. Jesus is like, listen, it's not about whether or not people recognize you for how righteous you are. Don't do good to be seen by others. Let's skip down to verse 13. In the next section, you're going to see the word woe a lot of times. When you hear the word woe, you probably think like, whoa, like you're riding a horse or something. But it's spelled differently. It's W-O-E. And woe, I didn't put this on the screen, the definition, but when you proclaim woe, it's almost like you're proclaiming misery upon someone. Okay, so it's that idea of denouncing misery or a proclamation of grief or sorrow or distress. But look what he says. This is verse 13. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. This is their problem. Number 3, the third fallacy, is that we see that they shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. Wow. That's a powerful statement, right? This idea of, you ever had a door slammed in your face before? Anybody? Ever get like mad at your brother or sister, slam the door in their face? Ever been door knocking before and you knock on someone's door, like maybe you're selling, hey, you guys want some Thin Mints or something? You knock on the door and they open it up, and when they see you there, they slam it in your face. Has that ever happened to you before? Some of you are old enough to where you remember going on the stateside campaigns where we would knock doors. There would be times, and here you are holding a Bible, and this person's standing next to you, and hey, I'm Philip, and this is Jessica, or whoever's with you, and so you knock on the door, and as soon as they see you, you get a word out, and then bam, here comes the door right in your face. What are they saying? We don't care. We're not interested. You're not even worthy of our time or our kindness or our attention. It's pretty, almost like getting slapped in the face, right? And so they shut the door. They shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. Imagine someone wanting to follow God, and the response of the Pharisee was, you did what? You're not welcome here. And they shut the door. Remember their attitude towards sinners? How come your rabbi, them talking to the disciples, how come your rabbi eats with tax collectors and sinners? We ought not to have anything to do with such people. Jesus was a friend of sinners. A Pharisee wanted to keep people out of God's kingdom, and they were the only ones, as if they were the only ones who got to decide. Let's look at verse 15. He proclaims another woe. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte. And when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. I don't know if you know what proselyte means, but it's really closely connected to this idea of evangelism. It's this idea of converting to something. And so Jesus kind of gives us an analogy here about he paints a picture of a Pharisee going on a mission trip. And they get on a boat, they sail across, we're on a mission trip, and they meet somebody, and they're like, guess what? This person's going to become a Pharisee. And that's the problem. That's the problem. They're more interested in creating more Pharisees, that's followers of their traditions, than they are creating genuine, authentic followers of God. Granted, that's who they thought they were. They thought they were authentic followers of God. But Jesus says, you guys are missing it. All right, let's keep going. Verse 16. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. What's all this about? Well, it seems to be about that they had a problem with dishonesty. It seems like they had a problem with dishonesty. Number 5, they're dishonest. Instead of honoring their word, they look for loopholes. When I made that oath, I swore by the altar, or I swore by the gift on the altar, and so it's not really binding because it's just the gift on the altar. Or when I gave you my word, I swore by the temple, not by the gold in the temple, so I don't have to keep it. It's like they were looking for loopholes and ways out of keeping their word. Verse 23, let's keep going. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe By the way, tithe means to give 10% of something. It was a command of the old law. They had to give 10% of what they own to the Lord, like bring it to the temple as an offering. You tithe mint and dill and cumin, and you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. And there's this idea here of they looked at something really, really small, but they missed the big picture, and that's really what Jesus is talking about here. They missed the big picture. A tithe was that tenth of something. And so Jesus gives this picture of them going to their spice rack and maybe opening up their pantry, and they go to their spice rack and they find the cinnamon and they pour out the whole bottle of cinnamon, and they go through the process of saying, okay, I'm going to take 10% of this amount of spice, all right? And so here they were going to their spice rack, taking their salt and their pepper and all that stuff and taking 10% out. But what do they leave out? They leave out mercy. They leave out justice. They leave out what it really means to be faithful. And Jesus is like, listen, and notice this too. He doesn't say, don't do the small things. What does he say? These you ought to have done in addition to the major, weightier things. You ought to have done both of these things. Verse 23. I'm sorry, we just read that, didn't we? Don't miss the big things. Verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, then the outside also may be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you also appear outwardly righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So they looked the part, they looked righteous, but on the inside they were spiritually dead. You look holy, you look clean to everybody else, but really you're a decorated tomb, right? Inside you're dead, full of hypocrisy and sin. Let's keep going. Verse 29. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you were sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Barachiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So the last thing Jesus points out to them is that they're blind to their own wickedness. They're blind to their own wickedness. They really truly believe that they're nothing like the generation of people who came before them. The stiff-necked, stubborn fathers that they had in the wilderness. We would have listened to Moses. We would have never done that to him. We would have listened to Elijah. We would have listened to Jeremiah. Jesus says, you're no different. They take pride into thinking they're different than their ancestors. You can almost hear them saying things like that. But it's here that Jesus says the strongest things about them yet. He says, you're doomed. You're doomed. And eventually you're going to be eternally doomed. And eventually you're going to kill and crucify and persecute God's messengers too. And if you know the rest of the story of the Pharisees, you know it's exactly what they did, right? They were the ones who put Jesus to death on the cross. They were the ones who wanted the apostles put to death. They were the ones hunting down Christians and killing them, right? So, what do we make of this? We're not here tonight to sit and eat candy and talk about a bunch of dead guys, you know? We're not here to just talk about them. Instead, we would be wise to listen to the words of Jesus, to the warnings of Jesus, and learn from the mistakes of these religiously warped people. Jesus' heart broke for these guys because they were supposed to be kind of like the heroes, right? They're supposed to be the good guys, but instead that's not who they were. They knew better. And I think that's what frustrated him so much, their hardness of heart. So here's why I want us to study this tonight. It's easy for us to look at these guys and go, man, they're so messed up. They got all that wrong. Let me challenge you tonight to open up your heart and honestly, truly consider, am I guilty of doing some of the things that they do? Because like I said, it's really easy to feel sorry for these guys. They had a heart that wanted to do God's will, but they also had the same kind of heart that was closed to truly doing God's will. So let's study this. Let's look at their mistakes and ask ourselves, am I guilty of some of these things? Number one, do I practice what I preach? Do I practice what I preach? Do I act a certain way at church and then I go back to school or I go to work and I act completely different when I'm not at church? The Pharisees were great at telling people how to live, but they weren't great at living it. Christians can be really great at telling people how to live, but am I living it? We claim to love God's law, but if we don't practice it, we show that God's law isn't really that important to us. Number two, do I do good to be seen by others? Ooh, do I do good to be seen by others? We live in a society, you guys are living in a culture that loves attention, right? That loves this idea of recognition and attention and being liked. Like, how many likes can I get? How much attention can I steal? How many views? How many follows? How many shares? Man, if you can imagine, like the Pharisees would fit in great today, right? And if they had had social media back then, they would have had like thousands of followers. They had the little verified check mark next to their name. They would have been celebrities. They would have had pictures, taken pictures of all the good things they did and posted them to get as much public affirmation, as many likes and followers and engagements and clicks, as many as they could. And maybe you've seen this picture before, but you know, what does a Pharisee look like in a picture? I think it's on the next one, maybe. Yeah. When you see that, what sticks out to you about that? Somebody, what do you see in that picture? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Here's a family that looks like they could use some food. And he's like, you know what? This is a great time, great selfie opportunity. This is just me doing good things for other people. #blessed, right? And so here, that's messed up, right? We say it's messed up, and it's a cartoon, but you've seen pictures like that before, right? Like in real life. Maybe we go to a third world country, and you're like, oh, here I am on the mission trip, just serving the Lord. Here's a little kid that I gave something to, and you're like, listen, I know it's good to do something good. It's good to use social media in a good way for God. But listen, if we're lifting ourselves up and not God up, it's wrong. It's wrong. And that's what these guys seem to miss. Man, Jesus said in Matthew 6, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. By the way, he's talking about the very same things that these guys were doing. For then you will have no reward from your Father who's in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you. Selfie, all right? That's kind of what they're doing. As the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. What is their reward? Somebody saw it. That's all the reward they're getting. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. That's the true reward. Number 3, do I shut people out of the church? Do I shut people out of the church? Guys, this point. Are there people that I've decided don't belong? Are there people that I've said, you know, they don't fit in with my friends. They're different, so I'm going to make sure that they know that. They're different, so I'm going to make sure that they know just how different they are. I want you to think about this. The Pharisees had a tight circle. If they didn't think you ought to be a part of that circle, you're out. You didn't have a chance. You know what that's called? They were bullies. They were bullies. They were supposed to be lovers of God, but they were bullies. You know, we have this little slogan or little motto in our youth group that belong, be loved. And it really is our hope. It's really my prayer that this place to you is a place where you can belong and be loved. But I want you guys to listen up. I didn't sit down with an agenda this week. I didn't say, you know, this is the class where I want to make this point. I didn't. That's not how I approach this lesson. I try to approach this lesson like I would approach any other lesson any other week, where we sit down and we say, okay, we're going to study the Pharisees. What does God say about the Pharisees? All right? Not what do I want to say about the Pharisees? When I read this passage this week, the more that I thought about it, and the verses, we'll put them up on the screen one more time, the more I read these verses this week, the more it convicted me. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Listen, I know for a fact that there are some of you in this room who are bullies. I know that. Do you know how I know that? I've talked to some of your victims. I've spent time listening to people crying. I've seen their tears. I've had a lot of phone calls with parents who are brokenhearted for their kids. I've had meetings in my office where people break down and cry because of what it feels like to be mistreated. I've seen the damage that a group message can do. Man, group messages, guys. So much damage. The church is meant to be a blessing, but instead, I've seen some people act like bouncers, you know, like stand as the guardian of the cocoon, like she doesn't belong here, or like guardians of the church, like he doesn't fit in here. I've seen people who've had the church slammed, the door of the church slammed in people's face, where someone's standing on the outside thinking, all I really wanted was friends. All I really wanted was to fit in. I've seen people run off because of the way that you talk about that person in your grade that's a little bit different. The message is sent at someone else's expense. I've seen screenshots. The pictures sent at someone else's expense that if they saw them, they'd be very hurt because they're made to make this person look really foolish. The conversations about the person that happens as soon as the person steps out of the camp cabin or as soon as the person steps out of the room. The intentional exclusion of people like, hey, don't tell her, don't invite her, we don't want her there. I've seen that over and over and over again. Enough. Grow up. We don't need Pharisees here. I'm sick of seeing the door of the church slammed in people's faces as if we're the ones who gets to decide whether or not a person is good enough to become a part of the group. I'm thankful God doesn't treat us that way. You want to be like Jesus? Number one, don't participate in that garbage, in that immature, foolish, ungodly drama. Number two, that's nothing godly about that. Number two, you go out of your way to care for that person that you've seen bullied or excluded or mistreated. You want to be like Jesus? Do those two things. I can promise you this. I promise you this. My wife can testify to it. There's nothing that makes me angrier or sadder than seeing someone in this group being mistreated. And I'm not sure there's anything that makes Jesus angrier or sadder. I'm telling you tonight, if you've been guilty of bullying someone, of shutting the door of the church in someone else's face, the church that's meant to be a blessing to their life, and you just shut the door to it, if you've been guilty of that, make it right. Have some humility. Have some maturity. I pray that your heart is broken over the fact that maybe you've caused damage. I pray that you've got the love of Jesus in your heart to fix it, to say, I'm done with that immature way of living. Have the decency to go to someone you hurt and say, listen, I'm sorry, I was a jerk. That wasn't right what I did. You didn't deserve that. I was wrong. And I'm asking you, I'm praying that you'll forgive me. Number two, if you've been bullied, I'm sorry. Please know that the bullying Pharisaical minority does not speak for a God-loving majority. You are loved by God, and there are people here who love you. Number four, am I interested in having more followers Or am I interested in creating more followers of God? That was one of their many problems. Number 5, am I honest? I remember doing what people did to what the Pharisees did when they'd break a promise or they'd break their word and they'd say, well, I didn't promise. You remember doing that as a kid or you'd be in elementary school? Well, I didn't say I promise, or I didn't pinky swear, or well, I didn't swear on my mother's grave, or whatever. Jesus is like, that's not the point. If you give your word, keep your word. Am I honest? Number 6, am I missing the big picture? Do I compartmentalize my sin and sort of like measure it against other things? Look at all these good little things that I do. I mean, I give on Sunday morning. I won't forgive people, but at least I give on Sunday morning. Or, I read my Bible every day. I treat people like a jerk, but at least I read my Bible every day. It's this idea of we don't strain a gnat and swallow a camel. We need to love mercy and justice and faithfulness. Number 7, I might look alive, but am I spiritually dead inside? That was their problem. Maybe you sing, you pray, you worship, but what's really underneath the surface of those things? Number 8, do I have a heart that is blind to my sin? Perhaps the Pharisees' worst attribute was their blindness to their own sin, their failure to see that their own sin led to a hardness of heart, a stubbornness, and an unwillingness to change. Their hearts weren't right, and eventually that's what convinced them that not only was it acceptable, but it was right to murder someone. They really believed that it was the right thing to do, to kill Jesus, to crucify him. Listen, if you and I have hearts that are not right, there's no telling where it'll lead us. If our hearts are far from God, so are we. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I don't want to be a Pharisee. Your son spoke so strongly to them because they knew better. And Lord, most of us in this room, we know how to act because we've been taught the truth. We've been told how to love other people, how they should be treated, how they should be respected. I pray that tonight the things that I spoke were not too harsh, but they were spoken in truth and in love. I love these kids. I love this place. And I believe you do too. And you want us to do your will. You want us to do what's right. And what makes it hard every week is being the guy standing in front of a crowd telling other people how to live. But Lord, I have my struggles too. And I don't always get it right. And I mess up over and over again. And you know that. But I pray others in this room know that too. That none of us are perfect. Lord, help us to do better. If we've hurt somebody, help us to make that right. And if tonight there's someone in this room whose heart's been touched by this message, I pray that tonight would be the night they do something about it. They try to make it right. They'd ask you for forgiveness. They try to make it right with those that they've hurt. Lord, help us to do your will. Help us to do what's right. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you're dismissed to cocoons. Thanks.